Imagine, what if the journey from ape to human didn't begin with fire or tools, but with a single bite of a tiny fungus? What if our thinking, our language, even our creativity all began with a mushroom trip? This is a theory so strange it sounds like science fiction. But could there be a seed of truth hidden inside? 2 million years ago, the world of our ancestors was changing fast, and not in their favor. Africa's lush forests were shrinking under a drying climate, giving way to vast golden savannas where survival meant constant movement, sharper instincts, and adaptability like never before. Hominins, the early members of our human lineage, were no longer swinging in dense canopies. They were walking under an open, merciless sun, following herds of grazing animals across endless grasslands in search of food. In this new world, every scrap mattered. Insects pulled from rotting logs, roots dug from the hard ground, marrow sucked from scavenged bones. And then there was the dung. Not exactly a gourmet choice, but for a desperate forager, the droppings of large herbivores were treasure chests teeming with beetle larvae and edible scraps. But in that dung, something else sometimes sprouted. Small, unassuming mushrooms with golden brown caps, known today as psilocybe, nature's most famous psychedelic. Imagine an ancestor, let's call her Aru, crouched beside a pile of fresh buffalo droppings, poking for grubs. Her eyes catch the odd shape, the faint shimmer of the cap in the sunlight. She's curious. She's hungry. She eats. What follows is impossible for her to explain. Colors deepen, the horizon warps, sounds stretch and pulse. The rustle of grass becomes a living rhythm. She feels faster, more alert. Every blade of grass seems to stand out in crystal detail. She notices a flicker in the distance, movement, a herd animal that the others missed. Over generations, McKenna imagined moments like this could have mattered. Low doses of psilocybin might have sharpened visual perception, giving these foragers a real edge, spotting predators sooner, tracking prey more effectively, navigating better across the complex patterns of light and shadow. The theory paints a vivid picture, a species with its senses tuned to a new frequency just because they stumbled on a certain mushroom growing from animal waste. And then, as the story goes, some days they would eat more, enough to bring not just sharper senses, but strange euphoria, bursts of energy, even heightened sexuality. In the competitive world of evolution, energy and mating drive could mean more offspring, and over time, a bigger population of mushroom eaters. But it's at the highest doses where McKenna's idea takes its wildest turn. The ego dissolves, the boundary between me and you fades, and a flood of empathy and unity pours through the group. Imagine small bands of early humans gathering in circles under the night sky, staring into the flames, hands touching, voices rising in chants they don't yet have words for. In this state, McKenna argued, they would form deeper social bonds, create communal rituals, and perhaps even experience the first stirrings of spirituality, visions of beings, of patterns, of a connected universe. Could this be how symbolic thought began? Could a humble mushroom have lit the spark that became religion, art, and language? McKenna thought so. The stoned ape hypothesis suggests that psilocybin wasn't just food, it was a neurological key, turning on capabilities that had been locked away for millions of years. Of course, it's an audacious claim, one that mainstream science has never fully embraced. But picture the setting, the African savanna stretching endlessly under a burning sun, herds of massive animals on the move and scattered across their dung, a tiny fungus holding the potential, just maybe, to change the destiny of our species. The question lingers in the air. In the grand story of human evolution, could one of the most important steps forward have started with a step sideways? To understand why the stoned ape hypothesis fascinates so many, we have to pull it apart, not to ruin the magic, but to see whether the magic stands when the dust of science settles. McKenna's central claim rests on 3 pillars: sharper vision at low doses, reproductive and social advantages at moderate doses, and transformative spiritual experiences at high doses. On the surface, it feels almost elegant, one substance influencing multiple layers of human development. But here's the snag. When we chase the evidence, the ground beneath this idea starts to crumble. Take the vision claim. McKenna often cited studies from the 1960s by pharmacologist Roland Fisher saying they showed psilocybin improved edge detection, meaning it could make hunters better at spotting movement and detail. The problem? Those studies weren't about hunting vision at all. They measured depth perception and spatial distortion, not clarity or accuracy of sight. And the findings didn't point to survival benefits. In fact, they suggested that high doses might impair performance. Today's controlled trials of microdosing psychedelics tell a similar story. While users often feel more alert or focused, the measurable cognitive gains are inconsistent or absent. The human brain loves the feeling of enhanced perception, but that doesn't mean it's actually sharper. Then comes the brain size argument. The idea that psilocybin use triggered the sudden doubling of human brain volume over roughly 2 million years. But when paleoanthropologists map the fossil record, the sudden part disappears. Our brains didn't leap forward in one dramatic burst. They expanded gradually across continents in multiple species, including Neanderthals and Denisovans, many of whom may never have encountered psilocybin mushrooms at all. Brain growth happened in Ice Age Europe, in tropical Southeast Asia, in environments where the mushroom and dung scenario wouldn't fit neatly. This is evolution's fingerprint. Slow, adaptive change shaped by multiple pressures: diet, environment, tool use, social complexity. And here's the biggest evolutionary sticking point: natural selection works on heritable traits, not on passing chemical experiences. Eating a mushroom can alter your mood, your perception, even your behavior, but it doesn't rewrite your DNA. The moment the effects wear off, the evolutionary signal is gone, unless those effects somehow lead to consistent, measurable increases in survival and reproduction across generations. McKenna tried to bridge this gap by suggesting that psilocybin increased libido and sociability, which might result in more mating, and over millennia, a larger population with similar behavior patterns. But without genetic transmission of the actual cognitive changes, the mechanism is shaky. And yet, even as the science pokes holes, the allure of the theory remains. Why? Because it fits a deep narrative itch. The idea that consciousness, this vast, mysterious landscape inside our heads, might have a single exotic origin story. Science tells us human evolution is messy, with many causes working in parallel. The Stoned Ape hypothesis offers a tidy, almost poetic answer, but evolution rarely writes poetry, at least not the kind we can prove. Still, the possibility refuses to vanish completely because somewhere in that long African grass, early humans did encounter psychedelics. Whether those encounters nudged their minds forward or simply gave them strange afternoons under the sun remains a question no fossil can answer, and maybe that's why this story won't die. Because it's less about proving a single mushroom changed everything and more about asking, what if it could have? If the stoned ape hypothesis struggles as a biological explanation, it becomes far more intriguing when viewed through the lens of culture, ritual, and the human hunger for meaning. Picture the deep prehistory of our species, not the farms and cities of the last 10,000 years, but the vast span of the Paleolithic, when every human on Earth lived in small, mobile bands, their nights lit only by the glow of campfires under unpolluted skies. In such a world, the boundaries between dream and waking life, between the visible and the invisible, were thin. Around 40,000 years ago, something extraordinary began appearing in the archaeological record. Cave walls blooming with complex art. Not crude scratchings, but vivid scenes of animals in motion, abstract symbols, strange half-human figures. In Europe, we find the painted horses of Chauvet. In Indonesia, hand stencils and hunting scenes. In Africa, geometric engravings far older still. These works suggest a mind capable of imagination, storytelling, and symbolic thinking, the very things McKenna believed. Psilocybin could ignite. While there is no direct evidence tying these paintings to psychedelics, anthropologists note an uncanny overlap. Many cultures that use mind-altering plants or fungi today produce art with the same swirling patterns, morphing creatures, and hybrid beings found in ancient rock shelters. In the Tassili N'Ajjer region of Algeria, cave paintings from about 7,000 years ago depict what some researchers call the mushroom shaman, A figure with mushrooms sprouting from its limbs and head, surrounded by dancing humans. Was this literal, symbolic, or both? Across the Americas, indigenous shamans have used peyote, psilocybin, and ayahuasca not just to see visions, but to guide hunting, heal the sick, and commune with what they describe as spirit worlds. In Siberia, shamans drank reindeer urine after the animals had eaten Amanita muscaria mushrooms, filtering the more toxic compounds and intensifying the psychoactive ones. In the Amazon, intricate ayahuasca ceremonies weave plant knowledge, music, and shared visions into the social fabric of entire communities. The key here is not whether these substances caused human intelligence, but whether they amplified and shaped the way early humans expressed it. Psychedelics are known to dissolve rigid patterns of thought, encourage novel connections, and heighten emotional empathy, traits that, in a small group, could strengthen bonds, resolve conflicts, and inspire collective myths. Imagine a hunter-gatherer band huddled after a shared meal that included the psilocybin-rich mushrooms they found earlier in the day. The fire crackles. Shadows dance on the stone walls. Someone begins to hum a rhythm. Another beats a hollow log. Another traces a spiraling line in ochre on the rock face. The line becomes a pattern. The pattern a story. The story a memory that will outlast the teller. Here, under the influence of a plant's chemistry, a new layer of culture might take root. One in which art is not mere decoration, but a living record of visions, a teaching tool, a sacred act. This is where the stoned ape idea finds a softer, more plausible home, not as the origin of humanity, but as a catalyst for certain cultural leaps. Just as fermented drinks may have encouraged the first agricultural experiments, or as spices altered trade routes, psychedelic plants could have nudged early humans toward richer, symbolic worlds. And those worlds matter. Myths and rituals carry survival knowledge, encode social rules, and help coordinate large groups without constant violence. In that sense, a mushroom-induced vision could indirectly shape a tribe's fate. So while fossils cannot tell us if early Homo sapiens stared at the stars with psilocybin in their veins, the art they left behind and the enduring role of psychedelics in traditional societies suggest that altered states have long been woven into the human story. The real question is not, did mushrooms make us human, but rather, how much of our humanity have they helped us see? In the last few decades, the stoned ape hypothesis has refused to simply fade into the background noise of speculative anthropology. Instead, it has experienced a strange resurgence, finding itself championed by a new wave of thinkers, mycologists, and psychedelic researchers who see in McKenna's eccentric narrative a seed of possibility worth exploring. Chief among these modern torchbearers is Paul Stamets, the renowned self-taught mycologist whose work on fungi has earned him both scientific respect and cult status in popular culture. In 2017, standing before a packed audience at a psychedelic science conference, Stamets revisited McKenna's theory with a mixture of admiration and cautious optimism, calling it a very plausible scenario for explaining one of the great unsolved puzzles in human prehistory, the sudden and dramatic expansion of the human brain. Like McKenna, he envisioned a scene tens of thousands of years ago, bands of early humans wandering across African grasslands, following herds of grazing animals, stumbling upon psilocybin mushrooms sprouting from fresh dung, and tasting them out of curiosity or hunger. In that moment, the mind's ordinary processing could have been jolted into unfamiliar territory, colors deepening, patterns emerging, auditory awareness sharpening, and a sense of connection to the group intensifying. Such altered perceptions, Stamets suggested, might have encouraged new forms of communication, heightened social bonding, and novel problem-solving, all elements that could, over long spans of time, tilt the evolutionary balance toward greater intelligence. But while Stamets' version is more grounded and stripped of McKenna's mystical flourishes, it remains provocative enough to draw the attention and skepticism of mainstream scientists. Paleoanthropologists argue that the timeline of brain expansion does not fit neatly into this story. The doubling of brain size from early Homo erectus to later Homo sapiens unfolded over nearly 2 million years, across multiple continents, in populations with wildly different diets and ecologies, many of which had no natural access to psilocybin mushrooms at all. Evolutionary biologists point out that while psychedelic experiences can dramatically alter cognition and perception, these effects are short-lived and not genetically transmitted, meaning they cannot directly drive the kind of inherited neurological changes that shape species over millennia. Cognitive neuroscientists add that while psychedelics may temporarily enhance associative thinking, creativity, and problem-solving, there is little evidence to suggest these fleeting boosts translate into permanent, heritable brain rewiring. Even McKenna's most famous claim that low doses of psilocybin could improve visual acuity and thus aid in hunting crumbles under scrutiny. Roland Fisher's oft-cited study actually measured the distortion of visual fields at different doses, not an improvement in clarity or depth perception, and more recent microdosing studies have struggled to show consistent, measurable cognitive benefits. The scientific consensus, therefore, leans heavily toward skepticism, viewing the Stoned Ape hypothesis less as a serious evolutionary model and more as a speculative metaphor, a colorful what-if scenario rather than a testable theory. Yet here lies the irony. In this role as metaphor, the hypothesis has arguably had more influence than many rigorous academic papers, sparking widespread curiosity about the possible role of psychoactive substances in shaping human culture, spirituality, and cognition. Its revival coincides with what some call the psychedelic renaissance, a renewed wave of clinical research into psilocybin, LSD, and other compounds for treating depression, PTSD, end-of-life anxiety, and addiction. In this modern context, McKenna's wild speculation feels less like a relic of counterculture and more like a provocative conversation starter about the boundaries between biology, environment, and mind. Stamets himself has admitted that while the hypothesis may never be proven in a strict scientific sense, it challenges us to consider the overlooked ways our environment, including its most humble organisms, might have nudged human evolution in directions we still do not fully understand. Critics counter that it is easy to weave compelling origin stories when evidence is sparse, and that the human brain's complexity likely arose from a web of factors: climate shifts, dietary changes, tool use, social complexity, sexual selection, rather than from any single dietary input. But even the skeptics concede that altered states, whether from mushrooms, fasting, drumming, or ritual, have left unmistakable fingerprints on the story of human culture, if not on our genetic code. And perhaps that is why the stoned ape hypothesis continues to linger, half in the light of scientific inquiry, half in the shadowy territory of myth, because it reminds us that the question, how did we become human, may not have a neat, single answer. It forces us to hold two ideas in tension: that our minds are the products of deep, slow evolutionary forces, and that within that process, brief and extraordinary experiences, whether chemical or cosmic, might have left ripples far larger than their immediate moment. For believers, this is a story of possibility, a whisper that something as small as a mushroom could have been a secret architect of consciousness. For skeptics, it is a cautionary tale about the human tendency to see patterns and meaning where there may be none. And for everyone, it remains an open invitation to keep digging into the mystery of ourselves, knowing that even if the stone ape never walked the earth, the curiosity it inspires might be just as important as the truth itself. In the end, the DOE and Stoned Ape hypothesis stands like a campfire story told at the edge of science, flickering between shadow and light, truth and speculation. Its narrative is intoxicating. The idea that our ancestors, driven by hunger or curiosity, could have stumbled upon a psychedelic doorway that forever altered the trajectory of our species. It invites us to picture small, weathered bands of hunter-gatherers on the African savanna, crouched over cow dung, sprouting strange golden caps, tasting them under the open sky. And in that moment, seeing their world not as it was, but as it could be. From such visions might have come the first spark of symbolic thought, the first weaving of myth, the first sense that the self was part of something vaster than flesh and bone. But while the image is vivid, science demands more than imagery. Archaeologists sift through bones, pollen, and stone tools. Neuroscientists measure synapses and brain waves. Evolutionary theorists model the slow, grinding mechanisms by which genes spread or vanish. In these disciplines, evidence rules, and the evidence for McKenna's bold claim remains frustratingly thin. There are no fossilized mushroom caps beside Australopithecine skulls, no genetic markers that scream psychedelic leap, no clear chemical fingerprints in the archaeological record. Evolution, as the data shows, is rarely the result of a single magic bullet. It is a tangle of influences: climate volatility, shifting diets, the pressures of survival, the demands of social life, all shaping the brain's architecture over deep time. And yet, for all its scientific shortcomings, the stoned ape hypothesis persists, precisely because it speaks to something that numbers and graphs alone cannot touch. It taps into our deep-seated wonder about consciousness itself, that shimmering, elusive phenomenon that lets us write poems, paint caves, and ask questions about our own origins. It forces us to consider that perhaps not all turning points in evolution were purely practical or survival-driven. Perhaps some were accidental encounters with the extraordinary, moments when the boundaries of perception stretched just far enough to plant new ideas in the human mind. Even the skeptics, while dismantling McKenna's specifics, often acknowledge that altered states have been central to human culture since the dawn of history. From the trance dances of the Kalahari to the ayahuasca ceremonies of the Amazon, from the shamanic mushroom rituals of Siberia to the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, humans have repeatedly sought substances and practices that dissolve the ordinary frame of consciousness. These experiences may not rewrite DNA, but they can rewrite stories. And stories in turn can change the way societies evolve. In that sense, the stoned ape hypothesis is less about psilocybin's direct role in shaping our neurons, and more about how encounters with the strange, the beautiful, and the terrifying have always been catalysts for human transformation. The theory lingers not because it is proven, but because it is possible, and because it challenges the safe, linear narratives we prefer about our past. After all, human evolution is full of mysteries. Why did symbolic art explode suddenly in the archaeological record around 40,000 years ago? How did language emerge in such complexity, with no direct parallels in the animal kingdom? What forces drove the unique blend of imagination, abstraction, and empathy that defines us? The stoned ape hypothesis offers one possible, if improbable, answer. And in doing so, it reminds us that the story of humanity may be stranger than we can currently imagine. Perhaps, as McKenna liked to say, the imagination is the goal of history, and evolution is not just a tale of survival, but a tale of mind's expanding reach into the possible. In the end, whether the stoned ape is fact or fable, it has done something rare. It has made both scientists and dreamers pause, tilt their heads, and wonder if the spark that lit our consciousness might have been hiding in the grass, waiting for a hungry ape to take a bite. And maybe that's the point. Not that we will ever prove McKenna right, but that we continue to ask the kind of bold, uncomfortable questions that keep the search for our origins alive. Because somewhere between the data and the myth, between the fossils and the visions, lies the truth of who we are, and the story of how we became human is still being written. To truly grasp the strange possibility behind the stoned ape theory, we must step through the curtain of time into a world 2 to 3 million years ago. A world where the air was heavy with the scent of sun-warmed grass and the sharp tang of rain on dry soil, where the horizon shimmered under an African sun that could both give life and take it away. Here, in the shifting landscapes of the late Pliocene and early Pleistocene, forests thinned into sprawling savannas, rivers carved silver veins across the plains, and the wind carried the distant roars of predators. This was the home of our early ancestors, Homo habilis and later Homo erectus, creatures balanced between two worlds, one foot in the safety of the trees, the other testing the uncertain openness of the grasslands. They were not yet human in mind or body. Their brains were smaller, their tools simple flakes of stone, and their language was more gesture and tone than word. but they were already restless experimenters in a place that demanded both caution and courage. Survival here was a daily gamble. Lions, hyenas, leopards, and crocodiles were constant threats. The seasons could swing from abundance to famine without warning, and waterholes were as dangerous as they were necessary. Yet danger and opportunity often walked hand in hand. Following herds of grazing animals not only meant access to meat through hunting or scavenging, but also to an unexpected bounty, the nutrient-rich manure left behind. In that manure, when the rains came just right, grew clusters of golden-capped mushrooms, psilocybe cubensis, small, unassuming, and unlike anything else in the ape's foraging world. Imagine one of our ancestors crouched over such a find, the smell of earth and dung in the air, hunger gnawing at the belly. To a mind accustomed to tasting almost everything in its environment, the decision to sample such fungi would have been as natural as trying a new fruit or insect. A bite, perhaps bitter, perhaps strange, and then, after minutes, a shift. Colors deepen, edges sharpen. The rustle of grass carries more meaning. The patterns of animal movement seem clearer, the glint of a predator's eye more noticeable. Maybe the sudden alertness makes the hunt more precise, the gathering more efficient, or maybe something even stranger happens. A burst of laughter at nothing in particular, a new kind of connection when eyes meet across the group, a fleeting vision that sparks curiosity. McKenna's hypothesis hangs here in these moments, suggesting that such altered states, repeated over generations, could have left small but critical fingerprints on the evolution of the human mind. In a land where the climate's mood could change in a lifetime, forests vanishing, grasslands spreading, rivers shifting their course, those who adapted fastest survived. Cognitive flexibility, sharper pattern recognition, heightened empathy. All of these were survival tools as important as speed or strength. If psilocybin subtly enhanced these traits, the advantage would have been real and lasting. And in a species as social as ours, the effects wouldn't stop with the individual. A mind more open to cooperation could mean a group better able to share food, defend against predators, or pass on new hunting strategies. Around a fire, itself a later but revolutionary discovery, these shared states might have deepened trust, lowered aggression, and created the first sparks of symbolic thought, laying the groundwork for language and culture. Of course, no fossilized mushroom will ever tell us for sure if this happened, and mainstream science remains cautious. Yet when we place the theory against the backdrop of that raw, untamed Africa, a place where curiosity was as essential as caution, it becomes easier to imagine. Our ancestors were not mindless survivors. They were problem solvers, explorers of their world, willing to taste the unknown. In the unpredictable theater of the savannah, even a small shift in perception could be the difference between becoming prey or becoming the predator. And maybe, just maybe, one such shift started with a golden cap growing in the shadow of a grazing herd. We may never know the full truth of the Stoned Ape Theory. No fossilized psilocybin, no cave painting of a mushroom, no direct proof can bridge the millions of years between our ape-like ancestors and the complex minds we carry today. But what we do know is that evolution is not a neat, linear march. It is a chaotic dance of chance, environment, and adaptation. In that dance, even the smallest steps, a new food source, a strange chemical in the bloodstream, a moment of heightened awareness, can ripple forward in time, shaping everything that comes after. Whether psilocybin was one of those steps or merely a shadow cast by our curiosity, it forces us to look at human history differently. It reminds us that intelligence may not have emerged only from competition and survival, but also from exploration and wonder, from tasting the unknown and letting it change us. And maybe that's the deeper lesson here. Our species has always been defined not just by what we needed to do to live, but by what we chose to do to understand. The Stoned Ape Theory might be unprovable, but it leaves us with a question that refuses to fade. If a single bite could help make us human once, what could it make us next?